I guess I'd like to start by thanking Phil Liberty for stepping up here and sharing the support that the teachers really have for this bond. And that's, I would say the most important update that I could provide is the energy and excitement and enthusiasm about the opportunity that this proposal will provide for our students' learning. There's some really positive momentum, and that's what I'm hearing from our teachers, our staff, other fellow administrators, and lots of parents and families as well. So we have a short presentation, going to run through some of the things you've probably seen a little bit, but it'll be good for those that out there that are watching to get an overview as to a big part of the why. Why are we doing this? What's the reason? What's the impetus for us to really take this huge step? And so, when you look at some of these photos, it's they predate me, I think, and it's pretty fascinating to look. It's a little slide presentation. There's the beep, and then you advance the slide roll. I do remember that technology. Our buildings were constructed in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Many of them are around 60 years old, and education has really evolved dramatically over the last 60 years. And while we've tried our best to evolve our buildings, we have been working within the constraints of those buildings as well. You look at the services that are provided in schools today, such a comprehensive program for students where you have occupational therapy, physical therapy, school psychologists, social workers, social emotional learning. I don't know that my elementary teachers were as back in the 70s, 80s were they did things that were inherently social emotional learning, but that term just didn't exist back in the 80s. So it really shows that the facilities were constructed at a time where many of the services that we have and opportunities that we have for kids just didn't exist and weren't even thought of at the time. In the 70s, we had 11,000 students, right around 11,000 students in Bloomfield Hills, and we're about half of that right now. And so we have had closures of buildings over the years, and really, as I advance to the next slide, you see our current configuration. And this is a configuration that we are in based on some decisions that were made 10 to 15 years ago. And we knew at the time we were operating buildings far under capacity, which is not fiscally responsible. So some really good decisions, quality decisions were made a dozen years ago while they're difficult decisions, they were fiscally responsible decisions to shift into the configuration that we have right now. When we closed Pine Lake, when we closed Hickory Grove and added the upper elementaries into our middle schools, we knew we weren't harming kids educationally. We created some neat opportunities, actually, when you talk about veteran learners, 8th graders working with 4th graders or 5th graders. Some of those opportunities do exist now because of those decisions that were made. But you can see we're all Blackhawks. We all end up at Bloomfield Hills High School, and that's fed by 3 different middle schools that have 2 different configurations right now. We have some buildings that are 4th grade through 8th grade, and a building that's 5th grade through 8th grade. The 5th grade through 8th grade building happens to be our largest middle school right now because it is fed by 2 elementary schools that are kindergarten through 4th grade, whereas East Hills and West Hills are the smaller of the 2 middle schools fed by K-3 buildings. And as I know the board is very much aware and the community is aware, we had shifted East Hills configuration, moving the 4th graders from Eastover just a couple years ago up to East Hills. So it's created some inconsistency within our district, and so depending on where you live, there's some slight differences in the pathway that you take in order to get to Bloomfield Hills High School. So the plan that we have proposed and that is a part of the May 5th ballot is, again, we're all Blackhawks. We know that. We're all going to end up at the high school, which is servicing our 9th through 12th graders. We would have 2 middle schools, a newly constructed instructional wing at the Losser site, utilizing the assets that we do have within our district currently in the auditorium and the gym and field house that do exist at the Losser site. That particular middle school would be 6th through 8th grade. It would be the middle school that students at Way and Eastover would attend as they matriculated from 5th grade to 6th grade. Way would maintain its current location with some additions and renovations, significant renovations. Eastover would take over the East Hills building, which again is utilizing the best assets that we have within our district. And then if you look on the other side of this flow chart here, you see the South Middle School, which would be at Bloomfield Hills Middle School current site, fed by Lone Pine and Conant. And similar to Way and Eastover, Conant would receive significant renovations in addition, and Lone Pine would take over the West Hills building. Again, utilizing the best assets that we have, the ones that would house these students in the most appropriate manner. And from a preschool standpoint, we would have 2 preschools based on the data that we have from within the last couple years where the demand is, and that's along the Telegraph Corridor and the east side of the district. So you would see Eastover's building would now become a preschool, which would facilitate all of the moving of the preschool from the Fox Hill site to Eastover. And Conant would receive an addition onto their preschool to provide more preschool programming at that site. So we get into the why. Why all of this? It's a huge undertaking. We know it's a $200 million bond, a very significant change. And if you've seen the videos that came out today, if you haven't seen them, I encourage you to watch them. They do get into a lot of the why, and you can see a little glimpse into many of the buildings that exist right now. Cohort size is a huge challenge with our current setup. When you look at West Hills Middle School, which I can speak very intelligently about as I spend half my waking hours are spent there, we have groups of students that are about 110, 115 students, 120 students per grade level. This creates some dramatic challenges with our programming as we look at trying to populate classes like band, orchestra, world languages. We end up with class sizes of 10 to 15 students sometimes even below that. And offering the students the 3 years of the same language, you're making that commitment to run courses that are 10 kids in the class. As I heard the discussion about DP and the different programming and the expenses that are involved with that, it just is not as fiscally responsible. And then you also get into, like at Bloomfield Hills Middle School currently with 5th through 8th grade there, space becomes an issue. If you're trying to run a 5th grade PE class at the same time as an 8th grade PE class, you can't offer as many sections of 8th grade as you really should. So we have PE classes that exceed 50 students at Bloomfield Hills Middle School, which is not an ideal number to have in PE. As you think about technology obviously is an expense that is included in this bond. And we've been very responsible with our technology. We have Promethean boards that were installed 15 years ago in our schools. When they were installed, they had a life expectancy of 7 to 9 years. We have the same Promethean boards. We've been updating projectors here and there, but we've done the best we can to really maintain and keep it so that when you're projecting in front of the classroom, the kids can actually see what's projected and interact with that board. But those have exceeded their life expectancy, and some of the capabilities of the interactive capabilities are starting to frankly not work anymore, and despite the efforts of our IT crew. When you look at the imbalance of the population in the different catchment areas of our elementaries, you have I believe it's 14 or 15 sections of elementary students at Lone Pine and 24 at Eastover. And so Eastover has a large enough student body to be able to have full-time specials teachers. At the other 3 elementaries, there's just not enough work for them to be employed full-time at one building. So we have a situation where the Lone Pine teachers for elementary are also instructing the 4th and 5th graders at West Hills. They're currently working with the same kindergarten through 5th grade students across 2 buildings. So you can see some of the challenges that exist there. As far as collaboration time goes, when you have so many part-time staff, I think it was one year at West Hills we had 13 or 15 part-time staff at our building or shared staff. When you're piecing together these schedules, you really minimize the opportunities for teachers to collaborate and have that team time where they're effectively working around the same group of kids. How are we going to best meet the needs of any particular student? Or how are we going to create this interdisciplinary unit? If they don't have the time to be able to plan that together, it's just not going to happen. So some of these opportunities will be created with this new plan. And when you look at that last bullet point there, that last column, I already kind of spoke about just the imbalance when you look at the populations and the distributions across the district. It's just, again, it's not consistent. Which we have space challenges in our buildings. When you think about the 1960s, 70s, kindergarten was half day. It was actually half day up until about 15 or 20 years ago. And as it went from half day to full-time, all day, you doubled the need of classrooms for kindergarten. So a classroom that was utilized for one group in the morning and then a different group in the afternoon is now utilized all day by one group, hence needing an additional classroom. So it really squeezed many of the classrooms that we have in our buildings. What were designed as appropriate sized kindergarten classrooms, oftentimes were cut in half in order to be able to house the demand and the need that we had.
Hey, Andy, just
Yes.
looking at one of the points, what do you mean by parking lots were not designed for students being transported to and from school? Like, what do you mean in the 60s and 70s?
I think what you're talking about is the number of parents and families that are driving their students now. So the volume of cars that we have
that's
that
what you
come
mean by that.
on and off our campuses on a day-to-day. We did a traffic study, I think about 7 or 8 years ago at West Hills, and I think we had 240 cars coming on and off our campus in the morning and afternoon, which obviously creates some huge constraints. West Hills, we're very fortunate where we added an exit lane and created a traffic flow that's much safer. But when you look at schools like Lone Pine Elementary, Conant, where traffic is out on the main roads, backed up onto the main roads during the
So you're
drop-off
saying,
and
I
pickup
think, that
times.
back in the 50s and 60s, when I was going to school, many more children were coming on the bus.
I think
and
you
not
had
as many
higher
parents.
bus riding rates, and
So that mix of bus versus individual cars has
Correct.
changed over the years, but our physical facilities haven't adjusted accordingly.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you. I referenced already in the top middle there where you look at the ancillary services, the OT, PT, social work, school psychologists, speech and language. When you look at that, those were just pieces that weren't included in the design of the buildings 60 years ago. So we have an opportunity to really plan the proper spaces, sensory rooms, meeting the needs of all learners.
So they're not going to have to be in hallways and closets.
Correct. We currently do have old, custodial closets that have been converted into school psychologist offices. And again, if you haven't seen some of the videos, it does show how we've been very creative with our spaces in order to meet the needs of our learners. But again, that's trying to kind of retrofit in with what we have as opposed to designing spaces to be the way they should be in order to provide those services for students.
As a teacher or administrator, your objective of creativity should not be how you rearrange spaces. It should be teaching creativity to children.
Having the spaces that facilitate that learning is what we're after. And you're right, Howard, when you think about the creativity that's gone into repurposing space and taking a different lens on spaces, it's something that's happened in all of our buildings. So
And just a question, there was a slide before about PD. So what happens now if you want to have PD after school for 4th grade teachers on 2 different times? Now, I'm just curious, does someone wait an hour? I mean, what do you end up doing?
So you bring up a challenge that we've lived with for the last 11 years. When we look at, when you think about our elementary teachers, I'll focus on them. When you think of, we have a new math program as of the last couple of years in Vision. If we want to do professional development with our teachers and give them opportunity to have some common learning with kindergarten through fifth grade, we do have to look creatively. Sometimes if it's a planned professional development day, like before school starts, we'll just adjust everyone's start time to 8 o'clock so that the elementary teachers move up, the elementary teachers at a middle school building move back a little bit, and they meet in the middle. For opportunities where it's maybe a half day of school, our amount of time where we can have them together is limited. We'll end up with about 2 hours of common time. So we may find a learning opportunity for our teachers, the middle school teachers whose dismissal time is a little earlier. They may do an hour activity and then 2 hours of common, and then the elementary would do the 2 hours of common and an hour activity afterwards. So it doesn't allow us to maximize the time that we could have together if they were all in a K-5 building.
So I know, obviously we had to do what's best, probably from a building usage where we moved fourth grade. So best practice, and this is why we're going to this, is the K through 5 concept at the elementary level and 6 through 8 at the middle school. That is a best practice that we need to get back to.
When you look at those learning opportunities and collaborative opportunities amongst staff, and then also, I didn't even mention, but you take your veteran learners, your fifth graders, and those leadership opportunities that fourth and fifth grade would have with those kindergarten first graders. I remember as a former fifth grade teacher at Lone Pine Elementary, we had our second grade reading buddies, or our Lone Pine buddies, and we were partnered up with the second grade class, and it gave all of my fifth grade students the opportunity to be that mentor for an 8-year-old. And those are opportunities that will come back with this shift back to K-5 buildings, in addition to what we already discussed as far as the professional learning opportunities for our staff. They talk about the top right corner there, the buildings were not designed with student and staff safety in mind. I remember starting in this district 20 years ago, and you could walk right in the front door of the building without it being locked. That's a dramatic shift in 20 years. And you think about the security that we have in place currently, while we've taken steps to improve, we have cameras, we have buzzer doors, we don't have that safe, secure entryway. We haven't looked at installing cameras throughout all of our buildings, film to add security to glass. There's many enhancements that will truly make our schools safer environments for our kids. And I love, again, if you haven't had a chance to watch that video that was released today, the safety one really talks about, I think Margaret Schultz talks about, it's all about students feeling safe. That's the most important thing in their learning. And when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have to start with safety in order to have learning. And so that's a huge part of this bond. Looking at special education spaces, having the appropriate special education spaces, putting it at the forefront as opposed to at the forethought as opposed to the afterthought of what all students need. And again, preschool and your early childhood 60 years ago was not as common as it is today. And so really looking at our preschool spaces and making sure that they're appropriate for our youngest learners. And we already talked about the parking lot, to really examine the traffic flow on each of our sites and make sure that they're safe for getting our students into school and getting them safely home, and not impeding traffic on main roads and the things that we can really do with this bond.
And music spaces.
Absolutely. When you look at the arts and our STEM, design, robotics, all of these are huge components within each of the building's plans, and really will increase the opportunities and spaces that we have available, not only for our students, but also for community use as well.
I mean, I was just in your building where the trombones were out in the hallway trying to practice, and we were trying to be heard in a meeting room right next to them. You need to have those appropriate spaces so the kids don't have to be in the hallways to
it is
have
not
small
uncommon
sections.
to hear the small groups practicing in the hallways, and you hear the flow of music coming down the hallway. So we talked about a few of these. Really, this would create consistency across our district. When you talk about an elementary school in Bloomfield Hills, you'd be talking about a K-5 building, as opposed to which elementary and what configuration do they have, and okay, so they have fourth grade, but the other fourth graders are at a middle school. You'd create a lot more consistency and common experience and transitions for students with this plan. We've already referenced the staff professional development opportunities when you look at students or staff being on the same schedule, in the same place with the colleagues who are instructing the same curriculum. It really creates some wonderful learning opportunities for our staff. And then really preserving the programming. As I referenced earlier, when you look at the cohort size, going to 2 middle schools is really essential for maintaining the programming that we have. When you look at again, orchestra of 8 to 10 kids, just because there's not enough students that are fed into that building, it really puts programming at risk. So looking at 2 middle schools, we'd have a robust population where we should be able to populate all of the courses that we currently offer at a healthy level. I referenced also those opportunities, again, back in our kindergarten through 5th grade buildings of having those veteran learners working with some of our younger learners within those buildings and providing leadership opportunities for our elementary kiddos.
So this on the elementary level too will take away a lot of, if not eliminate, the traveling music or the traveling specialists.
It won't eliminate it completely.
Won't eliminate it, but
it won't eliminate it completely, but it will make a huge step to having a full-time PE teacher at each of our elementary schools. And when you talk about having a teacher who's there, connected to the building, having the time to be able to follow up with a group of students that maybe had some conflict and go through some restorative approach with the students and kind of bring the kids back together so that the next class will be ready and be productive, and also sending the kids back to their classroom in a place where they're ready to dive back into that math lesson.
But it would avoid the person who's like the elementary special has to go to your building back to Lone Pine because the
art, PE, Spanish, music teachers, they would have a home, okay, and they would service the students at their home building, and they'd be part of that sense of belonging. They'd be a part of that community in that building. The ones I was just talking with our orchestra teacher the other day, and he's very excited about this plan. Looking at, I would have 1 middle school that I'm concentrated on. I can really put my energies into that middle school, and I know I'd have to travel to 2 elementary schools that are feeding the students that come to me for 6th grade. So he'd have that 4-year continuum with the kids, but he'd be able to really be at one building focused on the opportunities he can provide at that middle school, as opposed to being split between 2 different middle schools currently every other day.
Okay.
Fun photos again on these slides when you look there, and the one in the middle there, just looking at that, how the boundaries of our district and how that once was drawn. It's fascinating to me, but I appreciate the opportunity to be able to run through that again and look forward to any other questions you may have.
I appreciate all the effort that went into this and answering the question of why from a student learning perspective, from a safety perspective, but I think it's important for the community to also know the why from another perspective. And the reality that we have here, and we've all talked about this numerous times, is we have these 4 elementary schools and 3 middle schools that are 1960s schools built to 1960 standards. And Brian has come forward with the rest of the administration, identified for us, and I use round numbers. I realize they're slightly off, but the math will work. I wanted to get into fractions tonight. That right now we have about $35 million of critical needs to bring these 1960s buildings up to 1960s standards. Except we don't have the $35 million to spend to bring these 1960s buildings up to 1960 standards. So where do we get that money? Well, we have roughly $90 million a year of revenue and $90 million a year of expenses. So to meet $35 million of needs over the next 5 years, we really have to reach in to the money we spend in the classrooms. And if we didn't have that $90 million to meet $90 million of expenses, and we only had $83 million to meet $90 million of expenses, then where do we start making cuts? What happens to academics in this district? What happens to programming in this district? What potentially safety happens in this district? So somewhere we need to come up with at least that $35 million to bring us up these 1960s buildings to 1960s standards. But we're better than that. This isn't the time to just bring these up to 1960 standards, so 5 years from now we can say, great, and we're, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, and we have 1960s buildings to 1960 standards. It's time in 2020 to start looking forward in this community, and we've talked about this a lot, and start looking at the next 50 years and saying, where is this community going to be in 2030, 2040, 2050, and all the way out through 50 years, 2070. And with this $200 million bond, we can take these 4 buildings, 4 elementary schools, and condense, for the reasons that you talked about, to 2 middle schools, and get us to the point when we're done with this project. We won't be at 1960s buildings to 1960 standards, but we're going to be at 2020 buildings built to 2020 to 2070 standards. And I think it's important for the community to realize why this needs to be done also, not just from a financial perspective, but how not doing anything is going to cause us to spend money that we're spending on education to get to a point that 5 years from now, we're nowhere. And I think it's really important that that financial message that we've talked about so many times be part of the conversation as we go forward here, because not having those funds will impact students directly.
Cynthia?
I guess a little bit different aspect of financial aspect. So when we're talking about why, it maybe seems like a strange dichotomy, but I really see this through the lens of this being the fiscally responsible thing to do, even at the time when we're looking to ask our community for $200 million, which is a huge number. But since 1994, we have had to face the fact that we were looking at structural deficits. We've had to have a mindset across all those years about how we can continue to provide quality, programming for all of our children, preserve class size, preserve fine arts and athletic activities that we believe our community wants for our children. And it takes pride in being able to continue to provide to the children, and whether or not our children are still attending our schools. We've had to do consistent re-engineering of how we run the school district to be able to preserve those opportunities for our children. And so moving students around is not our desire. We're trying to make smart choices that will last for long periods of time. But no matter what the choices that we have made across those years, it has been with continuing to protect and preserve our programming for our children and take care of them in the process. So to me, yes, it's about instructional choices and being able to continue to offer the kind of fine arts programs that we are very proud to be able to have in our school district, the kind of world language program we think people want for their children. We want to be sure that they're safe, and we want to be sure that we're providing the right programs long into the future. So to me, our message has to, and I think we should expect that there will be some operating costs that will be reduced as a consequence from going to 3 middle schools to 2. We don't know what that number is just yet, but I think that this is a very smart plan to be able to move us into the future.
Well, I think one other thing, Jackie, you can go. Jackie?
Yeah, I think there's also something else, and it isn't that education is even staying steady, because in my new job, I see right now just the leaps of how science and technology is changing more and more rapidly, and industry itself is talking about Industry 4.0, and the escalation of what our children will be facing in the near future. And so it isn't just even that education is the same as it has always been and the way it was when we grew up. Education now are preparing children and students for jobs that don't exist now. And the way the types of experiences that we need to be able to give our students must be meeting these challenges. We are a top-ranked district, and we want to be nationally renowned district, and that's why our parents come here, and that's where our residents live in our area. So it isn't just that we want them to continue to have the same experiences. We actually have to rise to the challenge because there is a need for increasing skill sets and competencies that we didn't have to face, but our students will be facing as they take on tomorrow's challenges.
And I think what I was going to say, and Cynthia, I think we've said this in the past, that, the buildings were, these buildings are from 1960s, and, outside of the high school, we've never gone out and refurbished or asked the community to do anything with these buildings since the 60s. We've pretty much just patched them up, and that's probably leading to Mark's point as to why there is $35 million that needs to be done with these buildings just to get them to 1960s standards, because we haven't done what we probably needed to do, and that's why, getting to your point, Cynthia, it's fiscally responsible to do that now. Howard?
All right, let me try to summarize a lot of stuff that I've heard over the last 15, 20 minutes. So in the 50s and 60s, we had 11 elementary schools. Now we've got 4, excuse me. What's happened in the intervening 50 years? Special education did not exist. Michigan passed special education in 1970, and the federal law came in 1975. No Child Left Behind didn't exist. That was the 1990s. Security, all of these buildings were built before Columbine, Sandy Hook, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Preschool. Preschool is what I went to, which was nursery school. We don't have nursery schools anymore. We didn't have an IB program. Technology were overhead projectors and film strips. And I saw that with a long playing record,
Right.
beep,
Yep.
flip. We as a district have been very fiscally responsible. We have not invested in our buildings. We kept taxes low. But what did that fiscal responsibility, before I even get to that, STEM. STEM, when I was growing up, when these buildings were built, was the Apollo program, putting man on the moon. Robotics was science fiction, Isaac Asimov. Literally, it was fiction. It didn't exist. So back to fiscally responsible. Our prior boards and administrations have not updated these buildings, which has forced, you use the word retrofit, and another word for retrofit is jury-rigged. And I looked up jury-rigged just now, makeshift or improvised. And that's what we've done. We have put square pegs in round holes and rearranged buildings with the existing infrastructure to make it work. The fiscally responsible thing at this point for this board is to say, enough of that, let's move forward and do it the right way, un-jury-rig the process, move the elementary kids back to K-5 K-5 like they originally were. And because all of these jury rigging has caused additional cost and lack of academic programs that is kind of opaque. No one really sees it on the back end of what you guys have to go through to make it work as best you can. But that leads to less choice and more cost, exactly what we don't want. So this is the ability for us to basically do 1950s and 1960s for the 21st century. Do it all over again, but not with 100% clean sheet of paper. We're not tearing things down, but we are rearranging buildings and spending economically to do it for, as Mark said, and he's absolutely right, for the next 20, 30, 40 years going to the future.
Jennifer?
So you guys have stated it so eloquently. I just want to put a little bit more perspective on it. As you just said, Howard, we're really at a once in a 50 to 60 year crossroads. This is not something we just think is about bright, shiny objects. This is something that over many, many years we have studied and postponed to be fiscally responsible, and there is no more postponing of this project. And if you look at the national landscape, the Michigan landscape, the Oakland County landscape, the scale of this project and the itemization of this project, these are things that our sister districts have been doing for years. Here in Michigan, at least tracing back to 1994, when the changing of the state funding model made it much harder to provide for capital needs. I just found out from Tina the other day that Michigan is one of only 12 of the 50 states that does not have a systematic mechanism, either at in the state government, to provide for public school districts capital needs. So that is a major challenge. And so what I want to express to the community that this district and this board has taken pains over the years not to ask. And that we are asking now because it is absolutely necessary, it's absolutely customary, it's the right thing to do, or else we will deteriorate, excuse me, and fall behind, and educationally minded people won't want to move to this community anymore. And that is something that I don't think anyone who lives in Bloomfield wants on any day of the week. And so that is the reality of where we are right now.
Lisa?
I actually have a question. I saw many pieces in this presentation of updates that you've done. And I know that's the purpose of this presentation for the board, is to update us. So I'm wondering if in your interactions with the community through Speakers Bureau and through these many meetings that we're having, if you can give us some feedback about things that you're hearing. I've been to a few and I've got some thoughts, but I'm wondering if what kinds of issues are people bringing up? What things do we have to consider as a board? And what changes have you made in the way you're either presenting or in the actual way you're planning?
Well, and I think, so as we've gone through so many different presentations over the last few months, it's still really conceptual. And I think that is probably the first thing I think of to your question there, Lisa, is, for example, a robotics center. Our robotics headquarters is at the Lasser site right now. That's something that's evolving as we're looking at the different plans and looking at the different assets that we have within our district to see where would that be best utilized or best would it best serve the future. The biggest thing for me right now is making sure that the word gets out, the information gets out, because I feel right now people have bits and pieces, and some people don't have the full picture because they just haven't either seen a presentation or been able to take the time to dig into the materials that are out there now online. Because I think feedback I've received is, I guess basically I'm looking at many of the families that I'm interacting with. They're like hoping, let's get rolling with this because I want my kids to benefit from it. They see the opportunities that are coming. They also see there's major concerns. The families that feed West Hills have major concerns about safety and security, and they're very excited, number one, to get moving on that. And I think that's a piece that every single person I've talked to has said, okay, let's move with this. It's obviously the most important thing is making sure our kids are safe and secure. And so I guess the feedback, a couple things I'm seeing is, one, as we've really generated a lot more to be shared with the community now, and we have the robust website now, and the videos that were released as recent as today. I just encourage people to really dig into that, because I think you don't even have to dig into it too deeply to get a sense of what it entails. I think watching those 3 videos, looking at a couple of the slides or information sheets that are online will really inform inform the public.
So, the meetings that I've been to, they've been very positive, but I'm worried about reaching people that aren't connected through the schools. So I'm wondering if have we thought of linking our website to the township or to West Bloomfield, to all of our municipal websites that feed, our school district, so that we can reach people beyond the, just the schools.
Right.
Another thing is, you keep coming out with these really good slides that people want to share, like one maybe, without the entire deck, maybe, maybe they want to put it on social media. Can you make somehow PDFs that people can easily share of, the one that I really liked, I liked all of them, but the one I really liked this time was the one that you called the space changes one. I thought that was really...
Space challenges.
Yeah. Challenges. And it reminded me of doing exhibition at Conant, which went from 5th grade to 4th grade.
Right.
And Conant's one of the two elementary schools that still has a 4th grade, but I did it when there was the 5th grade, and I did it when there was the 4th grade. And as great as our students are and our teachers are, you can't do as much with a 4th grader as you can with the 5th grader. Just
Right.
there's a year difference. So
Absolutely.
and it showed in anyway. The feedback I've gotten really from people, and it is, to be honest, it's mainly parents who I've
Connected
seen
to
come
the
to these
school.
meetings, but they said that there is just a huge disconnect between what we expect of our students and our buildings. We're expecting them to be more than, we make do with our buildings, but what we're asking them is to excel. We're asking them to be the best and to be great and to live up to their potential. And what we're providing them with is something that there comes a time when your facilities really hamper what you're doing, and we are there.
Right.
We've reached there a
Yeah, you
long
look at
time
the
ago, but we're there
collaboration.
now. Yeah,
The collaboration piece, it's not uncommon to see kids laying in the middle of a hallway working together.
we are not giving them the facilities that they need to be able to live up to the expectations that we as a community and as a district have, and as the parents have. We expect them to perform in a certain way, and just really to take advantage of all of these different programs, and they're beyond hampered by the facilities. They're hurting our kids. They're not neutral, they're hurting them.
And it's an equity issue also.
I think this whole thing can be summarized in just a couple sentences. This isn't just about current students and current parents. This is about the entire Bloomfield Hills Schools community. And we have a problem here that's been 60 years in the making. We're not asking that it be paid overnight. It's going to be paid over 30 years. So we're talking about a multi-generational bond for a multi-generational problem for what's clearly a multi-generational community. And it's our responsibility at this time to look forward and to fix that problem.
Yeah. I just want to say one more thing before we move on. There are some great ideas that are also coming out of these meetings. It's too many for me to list, but one that I really loved was with the new pool that we're building, if it could be accessible. Someone came up with that. I thought that was fabulous. So, I mean, I don't know if you're hearing stuff like that too, but
When you say,
great
I
ideas.
hadn't even on my list, ADA, Americans with Disabilities
Right.
Act.
Good point.
504s. 504s didn't exist.
Right.
Thank you, Andy.
I appreciate all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were my co-presenters tonight, so thank you. I appreciate that.
You're
Clearly, it's a
welcome.
very well-educated board here.